Hi everybody, I'm Elise from the blog LePetitSaintCrochet.com, and today I am really excited to be talking to you about my 7 best tips for knitting the Wild Rabbit pattern by Dot Pebbles Knits. That's a mouthful, but I have a lot of really good tips, and number 3 is really the most important one, so let's go ahead and get started. If you have never seen the patterns from Dot Pebbles Knits, you are in for such a treat. These are some of the most realistic and beautiful patterns for knitted toys that I have ever seen. I am in love with these patterns. I am in love with this beautiful magical world that Claire Garland from Dot Pebbles Knits has created. She has a book called Magical Woodland Knits. It has 12 different patterns for all knitted toys. She has birds, she has a wolf and a squirrel pattern. There are beautiful, beautiful patterns. On Amazon, you'll be able to actually look through and see the photos of these beautiful patterns. They're absolutely incredible. Also, check out her blog because she has some free patterns, and I'm going to be making these beautiful little toadstool bookmark patterns. They're just gorgeous. So I feel like I'm so rambling about all of this, but let me tell you that when I'm scrolling on Instagram and I see her photos, I don't know whether the photo is of a living creature or one of her knitted toys. They're absolutely amazing. She has Siamese cats. She has a little duck that is the most precious little thing you've ever seen. There are so many beautiful patterns, and today though I'm going to talk about the Wild Rabbit pattern that you can find in the book, but you can also buy this pattern separately just on Etsy. I'm going to talk all about this sweet little bunny rabbit and give you my 7 best tips, which I already told you I was going to do it, but now I'm going to do it. Before we go any further, I just want you to know that I have everything listed in the description box below, so don't feel like you need to take notes because you're going to find a link for the yarn, the pattern, the book, everything I talk about. It's all listed there, nice and neat and very organized for you right down below in the description box. My first tip is to find a good quality yarn. If you want to use the yarn that she recommends in the pattern, that is great, but you need to find a yarn that will give you the desired effect. I feel like that if I had used my standard yarns that don't have any halo to them, they are not fuzzy at all, I think I would have been a little bit disappointed because this pattern really lends itself to a fuzzy texture, a really more realistic look, and you're probably going to need to use 2 different yarns. I found that the Rowan Kid Classic and the Rowan Kid Silk Haze were really, really great for this project. Now, those are kind of expensive yarns, I'm not gonna lie. I don't have a lot of it in my stash, and I've already made some bunnies with it, so it is a good yarn as far as you're not gonna use a whole lot of it even for this project. So that's a really good thing, but that is my first recommendation. Make sure you get the right yarn, because if you don't, I'm just not sure you're gonna be as happy with the outcome if you just use a standard yarn that's a little cleaner looking, that's a little crisper. I think you might end up not being quite as happy. I know that I really wanted something that had that fuzziness. I wanted it to be a little more lifelike, a little more realistic, and there's dimension in it because there's really 2 different colors with the Rowan Kid Classic and the Rowan Kid Silk Haze. They're not the exact same color, so it gives it some dimension, which I think it actually makes it look a little more realistic as well. So my next tip is to not worry too much about all the color changes that are within the pattern. A lot of the pattern has a lot of very subtle color changes, and I basically ignored all of those. I only used the 2 yarns held together, and I only changed colors when it went from brown to white. I did not do all of the subtle color changes because she actually sometimes uses 3 colors together. She's doing a lot of very subtle changes to give an even more dimensional effect to the fabric, making it look like real fur on a bunny rabbit, which I think is beautiful, and if you want to do all that, go for it. I just didn't want to have to do all of that changing, all of that switching around, so I only changed colors when it was the main color was changed. So that is my second tip. Take it or leave it, but that's what I did, and I think it turned out great anyway. So for tip number 3, this one is the most important, and this is the one that I had to remind myself throughout this pattern. The tip is to trust the process. Now, when I began the project, I got really frustrated right at the very beginning. Within the first, say, 3 rounds, I actually frogged it all, ripped it all out, and started over a couple of times because I kept thinking I was doing something wrong. And I wasn't. There is actually a hole that you are creating in the very beginning of the project. Don't worry about it. It's gonna get fixed later, but there isn't a note in there that says, hey, we're gonna fix this, don't worry, there's a hole. So I would really recommend that you just trust the process. The knitting in and of itself is not super difficult, but this is such a different way of constructing a toy than I've ever done before. So I was a little like, what am I doing? How is this gonna turn out? And I just had to believe that the finished product was going to be okay, even though in my mind I kind of couldn't see where we were going with this. That's my tip. That's the best one I can give you. Trust the process. Trust that what the pattern is telling you is the right thing, and that eventually, even if you don't understand what you're doing at the time, it's gonna work out in the end. So that's number 3. That's my best tip. The other ones are okay too. They're a little more practical, but I wanted to give you that one in case you start working on this and you're like, this is making me crazy. Just trust the process. Tip number 4 is about short rows. You are going to have to knit short rows in this project, but let me tell you that the section on short rows is so well written. It's so clear and explained so perfectly that I actually understand short rows a whole lot better than I did before. She has the written explanation for it that is very concise, it's very short, and it's sort of like, oh, that's all it is? And I was able to start knitting short rows, and I didn't even have to keep going back and learning how to do it every single time, which I've had to do in patterns before. This one was so clear. I love the way that she describes these short rows, and if you've never knit them before, literally do not be worried about it. It is so simple. It's really easy to do. It's just a matter of moving your yarn from the front to the back or back to the front, depending on if you're on the knit and purl side, slipping a stitch from the left-hand needle to the right-hand needle and moving the yarn back. That is it. That's all a short row is, but it gives some shaping and it's a really neat technique. So just know that if you haven't ever done short rows before, don't worry about it. It is not hard. If you can knit and purl, you can make a short row. So tip number 5 actually kind of goes along with tip number 3, and that is about following the pattern exactly as it is written. I would highly recommend not skipping around. Don't jump from one section to another. Follow the pattern exactly from the very first row all the way till the very end. Don't skip around, and I think that that will help you to knit this pattern a little bit easier. There are some patterns that I kind of jump around. I'm like, I'm gonna go ahead and make the arms now. I'm gonna make the legs here. I'm gonna do the head now. But for this one, I think that it's pretty critical that you do it in the exact order, at least the first time, because it really helps you kind of figure out the construction. I'm not really good with that spatial kind of recognition, constructing toys. I think that's what designers are really good at, and I am not good at that. For me, I really needed to trust the process and follow the sequential order of the pattern, and that actually I think helped me a ton. Tip number 6 is about stuffing. I actually used a combination of the polyfill regular stuffing that we use, the toys, the fiber fill, and I used also some of the poly pellets. And I used the poly pellets in the little rear end area of the bunny rabbit because I wanted to give it a little heft. I wanted to give it a little weight, and I didn't want that throughout the entire bunny because poly pellets don't necessarily let you shape a toy very well. It's great for stuffing, and I used it with the Frog and Toad because there was so much shaping in Frog and Toad already in the knitting that the actual stuffing didn't need to be shaped. But with this bunny, you are going to do some shaping with your stuffing with the fiber fill. So a little bit of the poly pellets down in the rear area, and then the rest of it is with the fiber fill. So I think that that worked out really nicely. You could just use the fiber fill if that's all you've got, but I like that it gives a little bit of a weight, and I think it makes it feel a little bit more realistic as well. But I would not use just the poly pellets because I think it would just make it a little too floppy. You won't be able to shape it as easily, I think, if you were strictly using the poly pellets. So that would be my recommendation. Use a combo, and I think that it turns out really well when you do it that way. But if I only could use one, I would use the fiber fill. Tip number 7 is about the eyes. My recommendation is to not use plain black safety eyes. I really think that it's going to leave the project looking a little flat. I think when you use an eye that is multi-dimensional, it's got color, you could really experiment with this. You could use different colors. I wanted something that looked really realistic, but my goodness, you could use all different kinds of eyes. I think they could be really beautiful. But I think going with something just a little bit special for this project really will bring it more to life. And I actually would love to try some glass eyes at some point, but these were just pretty inexpensive plastic eyes. They're not as cheap as the black ones, and if that's all you've got and that's all you can do, then go for it. It will be okay. But I do think that adding that color, that little more realistic looking eye, just added something to the project. So I hope that you think so too, but experiment and let me know if you try something different. I would love to know how you felt it went. I hope you enjoyed those 7 tips, and I've got just kind of one little final thought about the pattern is that I felt like it was a very well written pattern. There are no mistakes in it. The only thing that I would caution you, you need to be able to read a pattern very well. I think that that will be very important to be able to make this little bunny rabbit. And I also found that the notes sometimes left me a little bit confused since I've never done this before, and I felt like I had to rely on a lot of my skills from knitting other toys because I understood some construction a little bit. So that may have just been me, and I know that there are a lot of people who have knit these beautiful toys and had no issues, but for me it was a little bit confusing at times. So just a warning there that remember to trust the process, and it would probably help if this wasn't your very first toy you're ever knitting in your whole life. I think that if you're a very strong knitter and you don't get your feathers ruffled a whole lot and you're fairly confident, then you probably will do fine. The knitting isn't the hard part. It's pretty straightforward as far as knitting and purling and increasing and decreasing, casting on and off. I just found that sometimes I just didn't understand what I was supposed to do from the pattern notes. And the photos are okay. I didn't feel like that they were so great that if you zoomed in on them that it was super clear what was happening. So I felt like I did have to rely on my toy knitting experience to be able to knit this pattern. I still feel like it is really worth it. I feel like it is a beautiful pattern, and now that I know a little more about Claire Garland's style, I think I'd be able to knit most anything she has now because I kind of have my mind wrapped around how she works. So every single designer is a little bit different in the way that they explain how to do certain things, and there are some that speak to you and you understand what they're trying to say very clearly, and there are others that you find a little more challenging. And for this one I found that just a tad bit more challenging, and I am not discouraging you from getting this pattern because I really think it is beautiful. It is so unique, but I do want you to know my thoughts on it. Like a friend would tell you, hey, by the way, just so you know, this is one of the kind of issues that I came across. I still think it's beautiful. I still think it's worth knitting, but just know that going into it so that you're not frustrated. I don't want a beginner knitter grabbing this pattern and being so frustrated because you're like, I can't do this. This one might be a little more challenging for you. So I just want to share my experience. I'm not trying to say anything negative at all. I just want to put that out there that I've said this too many times now. So I'm going to go ahead and shut my mouth a little bit. I just wanted to share that little bit of information so you can make the best decision whether you are ready to knit this little bunny or not. Another great resource for you is the Dot Pebbles Facebook page. She also has an Instagram page that I feel like is very inspirational. It's so beautiful, but sometimes I think Facebook groups are a little bit better about being able to interact with the designer and also kind of find out tips and tricks from other makers. So I think that's a really good group to join if you're interested in knitting these beautiful toys. I will leave a link for it in the description box below as well. I hope you love my little bunny as much as I do and that you found the tips that I gave you a little bit helpful in case you want to knit this little bunny rabbit yourself. As always, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today. I just think you guys are so amazing and wonderful. Thank you all so very much for all the well wishes on my last video where I shared my son being in the hospital. It was a very stressful time and he is getting better, so thank you so very much for that. I really appreciate all of you guys so very much. And if you would please like this video, if you would subscribe to the channel, that would be amazing, and share the channel with friends if you have anybody somebody in your life that you're like, I really think you ought to knit or crochet toys. That always helps me out as well. If you share the channel, that would be amazing. And thank you guys for always sharing with me where you're from. I love it. Even if you're just here in North Carolina like I am, or around the US, or any of the different continents, I am just so amazed to hear from all of you guys all over the world. It is so incredible. So I hope you're safe wherever you are in the world, and happy stitching.